My name is Margot Hayes, 66 years old. What I'm about to share didn't just change my life, it shattered everything I believed was real. The day of my husband Ernest's funeral was the quietest, heaviest day of my existence. Rain had stopped, only the earth's damp breath surrounded us. While I stood beside his grave, a message appeared on my phone from an unknown number. I'm alive. My fingers went cold. I typed back, trembling. That's not possible. You're in the casket. Who is this? The reply came seconds later. I can't say. They're watching. Don't trust our sons. The screen blurred. My knees almost gave out. I looked up and saw Charles and Henry, our boys, standing over their father's coffin with strange, calm faces. Something inside me twisted. Their tears felt practiced. Their arms, when they hugged me, were iced out. For 42 years, Ernest had been my partner, my refuge, my reason to wake each morning. I met him when I was in the small town of Spring Creek. We grew up on the same dusty back roads, chasing modest dreams. I scrubbed floors to care for my sick mother. He fixed bicycles in the tiny shop his father left him. We were poor, but we were rich in everything that mattered. I still remember the first time he spoke to me. A Tuesday morning, the market smelled of bread and rain. I wore my faded green dress and shoes that had long given up their fight. He stepped out of his shop, grease on his hands, and smiled with a shy warmth that pierced right through me. "Good morning, Margot," he said softly. "Need me to check your bike?" I didn't even own a bike, but I made up an excuse just to keep hearing that voice. That one conversation became many. Picnics under the old oak in Town Square Park, whispered promises of forever, and finally a small wedding filled with hope. The first years tested us. Our two-bedroom house had a tin roof that sang when it rained. We placed pots everywhere to catch the leaks, laughing as water dripped through our ceiling. We had little, yet we had everything. Ernest worked from sunrise to sunset in the shop. I sewed clothes for the women in town. When Charles was born, my world glowed brighter. 2 years later came Henry, just as perfect. I poured every ounce of love I had into those boys. Ernest taught them to fish, to fix what broke, to finish what they started. I taught them to be kind. We were a family, or so I thought. As time went on, cracks appeared. Charles, always ambitious, began to question everything. Why don't we have a car like other families? Why do we live so small? Henry followed him in everything. When Charles turned 18, Ernest offered him a job at the shop. Charles scoffed. "I'm not wasting my life fixing bikes. I'm going to be someone important." The words stung more than either of us admitted. That night, Ernest sat on the porch, eyes lost in the stars, silent. His son hadn't just rejected his work, he'd rejected him. Years rolled forward. Charles built a career in real estate. Henry joined soon after. Money came fast, faster than pride or gratitude. At first I was proud. They had escaped the poverty that bound us. But success changed them. Visits became rare. Calls grew shorter when they did come home. It felt like strangers entering our lives. Sharp suits, polished shoes, expensive cologne. They talked about investments, not memories. And in their eyes, I saw pity. "Mom," Charles told me one afternoon, glancing around our weathered home, "you and Dad should move somewhere better. This place is falling apart." He wasn't wrong. But those cracked walls held the story of our lives, where we laughed, fought, dreamed. It was ours. Ernest only sighed and said, "Margot, money has changed our boys. We aren't enough for them anymore." I refused to believe it. I kept making excuses for them. The missed calls, the short visits, the promises that never turned real. "They're busy," I told myself. "They'll come back to us one day." But deep inside, I already knew Ernest was right. We had lost our sons long before I ever lost my husband. I just hadn't realized how complete that loss truly was. The real fracture appeared the day Charles married Jasmine Albright, a woman whose perfume smelled like the city and whose eyes carried quiet contempt for everything simple. The first time she came to our home, her high heels sank into the soft dirt of our porch. Her red dress shimmered, brighter than anything I'd ever owned. "Nice to meet you," she said, her smile as thin as the fingers she offered me. Her eyes drifted across our small living room walls I'd painted myself, curtains I'd sewn by hand, and I shrank under that gaze. At dinner, she barely touched her plate. The meatloaf stayed whole, the chicken untouched. Charles, once proud of his mother's cooking, kept whispering apologies. "Next time, we'll take them out to a restaurant," he said quietly to Jasmine. He thought I couldn't hear. I heard every word, each one cut like a knife. Henry, meanwhile, never married, but he learned distance even faster than love. He visited only on birthdays or holidays, always checking his phone, always halfway out the door. "Mom, I have to go," he'd say. "Big meeting tomorrow." Family Sundays disappeared. Christmas turned cold, polished smiles. Expensive gifts, quick goodbyes. They gave us things we didn't need and took from us what we couldn't replace. Time. Ernest and I grew old quietly. He still worked in the shop, though his hands trembled now. I still sewed, though my eyes blurred. We survived on our small earnings, proud that we never asked for help. One night, as we sat on the porch with 2 chipped coffee cups between us, Ernest said, "Do you know what's saddest, Margot? It's not that they have money. It's that the money made them forget what matters." He was right again. Our sons hadn't just grown richer. They had grown away. Then came the new houses. Charles bought a mansion worth $200,000. Henry followed, buying a luxury condo for $150,000. Suddenly, our boys were living dreams we'd never even dared to imagine. Jasmine visited once, uninvited, and looked around our little home. "You should sell this place," she said smoothly. "Move into a retirement community. It would be more comfortable for you." Community. The word struck like a slap. After 40 years of building our own home, of raising sons within these walls, she wanted to send us to a place meant for people waiting to disappear. Ernest straightened his back and answered firmly, "We don't need a home, Jasmine. We already have one." But I saw the look on Charles's and Henry's faces. They agreed with her. We weren't parents anymore. We were a problem they wanted solved neatly. A week later, Charles showed up holding papers, printed, stapled, prepared without a word to us. "Mom, Dad," he began, wearing that polished smile I'd come to fear, "this house is worth maybe $1,000. If you sell it, I can add some money so you can move somewhere better." Somewhere better. As if happiness could be priced. To us, no place was better than the one we had built with our hands, our laughter, and our tears. But Charles couldn't see that. For him, everything, even love, was a transaction. "Besides," he continued, "I think Dad should retire from the shop. He's already 70. It's time to rest." Ernest looked at him, eyes tired but proud. "Son, working isn't a burden for me. It's what keeps me alive. It gives my days meaning." Henry leaned forward, backing his brother as always. "But you could get hurt. Dad, at your age, an accident would be dangerous." Their words sounded gentle, but beneath the concern, I felt something else in pain. A quiet urgency I couldn't name. The months that followed were tense. Our sons became relentless. They brought real estate agents to the house without telling us. They had our home appraised without our permission. Every conversation began to sound the same. "We just want what's best for you," they'd say. One night, during dinner, Charles finally said what he'd been rehearsing. "Jasmine and I decided to have kids soon. We'll need help with expenses. If you sell the house and move to a smaller place, that money could be an early inheritance." An early inheritance. He said it so casually, like he wasn't asking for our life while we were still living it. I looked at Ernest. His jaw tightened, but his voice stayed calm. "Son, when your mother and I are gone, everything we have will be yours. But while we're alive, our choices are our own." Henry's tone hardened. "Don't be stubborn, Dad. You're old now. You can't keep living in the past." That night, after they left, Ernest and I sat awake till dawn. For the first time in our 40-year marriage, we spoke of our sons not as blessings, but as strangers. "Something's wrong, Margot," he said, eyes heavy with worry. "This isn't just ambition. There's something darker behind this pressure." I didn't believe it then, but his words would haunt me later, because he was right. So right. Our sons weren't just drifting away. They were planning something cold, deliberate, devastating. The last normal conversation I had with Charles was 3 weeks before Ernest's death. He came alone without Jasmine. He sat at the same kitchen table where he'd once eaten cereal as a boy. "Mom," he said quietly, "no matter what happens, Henry and I will always take care of you." At that moment, those words comforted me. Now, remembering them beside Ernest's grave, they freeze my blood. Why did he say no matter what happens? What did he know that I didn't? The accident happened on a Tuesday morning. Ernest had left early. Like always, same blue overalls, same lunchbox, same kiss on my forehead. I was in the kitchen making his favorite lunch, meatloaf and mashed potatoes, when the phone rang. "Mrs. Hayes," a man's voice said, unfamiliar and urgent. "Your husband's been in a serious accident. You need to come immediately." The words blurred in my ears. My legs went weak. I clutched the doorframe to keep from collapsing. "What happened? Is he okay? Is he alive?" "Ma'am, please come as soon as possible." Doris, my neighbor, drove me to the hospital. My hands were shaking too badly to hold the keys. The drive felt endless gray sky, ringing ears, heart pounding like it knew something. My mind refused to believe. Ernest was careful, always careful. He'd fixed that same machine 100 times before. How could this happen? When we arrived, Charles and Henry were already there. No one had called them, not me, not the hospital. But in my panic, I didn't think about that. "Not yet, Mom," Charles said, pulling me into his arms. "Dad's in bad shape. The doctors say a machine exploded at the shop. He has severe burns and a brain injury." Henry stood beside him. His eyes were red, but something behind them felt wrong. A flicker. A shadow I didn't want to see. He didn't look broken. He looked restless, like someone waiting for news, not mourning his father. A nervous twitch in his hands, eyes darting toward the hallway. Something was off. "Can we see him?" I asked, my voice trembling. The nurse nodded softly. "Only immediate family, one at a time. 5 minutes, no more." When I entered that ICU room, my heart stopped. Ernest lay under a white sheet, surrounded by machines that hummed and beeped like a foreign language. Tubes snaked from his arms, his chest, his mouth. His face was swollen, wrapped in bandages. If not for his wedding band and the faint rise and fall of his chest, I wouldn't have known it was him. I reached for his hand, the only piece of skin untouched. "Ernest, my love, I'm here." My voice cracked. "You're going to be okay. You always are." For a moment, his fingers twitched. A weak, desperate squeeze. His eyelids fluttered. He was fighting my warrior, still fighting to come back to me. The next 3 days were a blur of fear and exhaustion. I barely left the hospital. I slept in hard plastic chairs, half awake, half dash, praying. Charles and Henry took turns sitting with me, but they weren't really there. They spoke in low tones with the doctors, their faces unreadable. I caught fragments of conversations I didn't want to hear. Insurance coverage. Medical costs. Life policy benefits. Henry asked about compensation limits. Charles talked on the phone about beneficiaries. On the second day, he finally turned to me. "Mom," he said quietly, "we checked Dad's policies. He's got a 50,000 life insurance and maybe 75 from workers' comp." I stared at him, numb. "Why are you talking about money?" I snapped. "Your father is still alive." "Of course, Mom," he murmured, but his eyes were doing math. There was no grief there, only calculation. On the third day, Dr. Patterson called us into a small room. He was gentle, the way doctors are when words turn into weapons. "Mrs. Hayes," he said softly, "your husband's condition is critical. The burns are infected, and the head trauma is more severe than we thought. We need to be realistic about his chances." My lips trembled. "What are you saying?" "You should prepare for the worst. He's in an induced coma. We can keep him alive indefinitely, but it's unlikely he'll ever wake up." Everything inside me broke. 42 years of marriage gone just like that. A lifetime reduced to heartbeats on a monitor. "We want to try everything," I said through tears, "no matter the cost." But Charles exchanged a glance with Henry. That same cold, rehearsed look. "Mom," Charles began, "we have to be practical. Dad wouldn't want this. He always said he never wanted to be a burden. A burden." That word cut through me like glass. "He's your father," I shouted. "He's not a burden. He's the man who gave you everything." Henry leaned forward, calm, logical. "We just don't want you to suffer, Mom. The bills. They could wipe out your savings. Money. Always money." Even as my husband lay between life and death, they were calculating value. That night, when the hospital went quiet, I sat beside Ernest and held his hand again. "My love," I whispered, "I don't know what to do. They say there's no hope. But how do I live without you?" And then something happened. His fingers moved. Barely, but enough for me to feel it. A squeeze. Weak, but real. His lips parted, trembling as if trying to speak earnest. I called the nurses, my heart pounding. "He's reacting. He's trying to say something." They rushed in, checked the monitors, the tubes, the numbers. Then the nurse looked up, expression flat, mechanical. She shook her head slowly. Whatever I had felt, whatever I had hoped, was gone. "Sometimes there are involuntary spasms. Ma'am, it doesn't mean he's conscious." But I knew better. That wasn't a spasm. That was Ernest. My Ernest trying to reach me. Trying to say something. 2 days later, before dawn on Friday, I heard it. The sharp wail of alarms, red lights flickering down the sterile hallway, nurses running. My heart froze. "No. No, no, no." I screamed, stumbling toward the sound. They worked on him for 40 minutes. 40 minutes of wires, compressions, shouts, and desperate orders. Then silence. At 4:37 a.m., they called it time of death. 4:37, the words hung in the air, heavy, unreal. The pain wasn't emotional, it was physical. It tore through me like something had been ripped out from inside. I fell beside his bed, holding his still warm body, begging him to wake up. But his hand no longer squeezed mine. His chest no longer rose. He was gone. Charles and Henry arrived an hour later, not in shock, not even out of breath. Prepared. Charles carried folders. Henry carried a phone and a list of numbers. "We already talked to Spring Creek Funeral Home," Charles said flatly. "They can collect the body this morning," Henry added. "The insurance claim's already in motion. Their father had been dead for 1 hour, and they were talking paperwork. Cold, efficient, too ready. Something was terribly wrong, but my grief was too raw, too consuming to let me see clearly. They planned everything. The funeral, the service, the casket. I wasn't consulted not once. It's what Dad would have wanted. Charles told me when I protested. Simple, quick, no fuss. No fuss. Ernest deserved the world. Not a rushed goodbye buried under convenience. The day of the funeral came draped in gray clouds. The sky itself seemed to mourn. I wore my old black dress, the same one I'd worn at my mother's funeral decades ago. My hands trembled so badly that Doris had to button it for me. "Be strong, Margot," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Ernest would want you strong." But I wasn't strong. I was hollow, a body without a soul. Every inch of our home screamed his presence. His coffee mug still sat by the sink. His tools rested on the porch. His pillows still held his scent. At the cemetery, the emptiness deepened. Hardly anyone was there. Just Charles, Henry, Jasmine, Doris, me, and the pastor. Where were the others? His coworkers? His neighbors? The people he'd helped for decades? Where are the guys from the shop? I asked quietly. Charles didn't even blink. We didn't want to bother anyone. Dad was private. He'd prefer something intimate. A lie. Ernest loved people. He lived for his community. He'd never want a funeral without them. Why had Charles made it all so secret? So fast during the service I studied my son's. Charles wore his mask of grief perfectly, but his eyes kept flicking toward his watch. Henry looked restless, tapping his foot, checking the time, and Jasmine, behind her black veil, was scrolling through her phone. That was their goodbye. Not sorrow-impatience. The pastor spoke of peace of heaven, of rest. His voice faded into the wind. I didn't want Ernest to rest. I wanted him home. On our porch, with coffee and laughter and life. When it was time to throw the dirt over the casket, my legs gave out. Doris caught me before I fell. The sound of the soil hitting the wood, thud, thud. THUD was the sound of my heartbreaking final. Hopeless gone, it happened the moment the last handful of dirt hit Ernest's grave. The air was still heavy with rain and silence when my phone buzzed in my pocket. A message, from an unknown number. "I'm alive." That's not me in the casket. For a moment, I forgot how to breathe. The letters blurred on the screen, dancing before my eyes like a cruel illusion. I must be hallucinating, I thought. Grief was breaking me, but my hands trembling, shaking, typed back anyway. "Who are you?" The reply came instantly. "I can't say. They're watching. Don't trust our sons." The phone slipped from my hand as if it had turned to fire. Doris bent down to grab it, but I stopped her, snatching it before she could touch the screen. No one could see this. Not yet. Not until I understood what kind of nightmare I'd stepped into. Charles walked toward me, his face painted with concern. "Mom, are you okay?" I looked at him closely, searching for something, a flicker, a twitch, a tell. His eyes seemed sincere, but now every glance, every word felt like a performance. "I'm fine," I lied, sliding the phone into my purse. "I just need to go home." The drive back felt endless. Every vibration of my phone made my pulse spike. Was it a joke? Some sick prank by someone who knew about the funeral? Or could it be true? If Ernest was alive, who was lying in that coffin? And if he wasn't, who knew so much about our family? About our sons? That night, the house didn't feel like a home. It felt like a tomb, his tomb. I sat in the dim light of his office, the smell of his cologne still faint in the air. I replayed everything from the past few days. Ernest's accident had never made sense. A machine exploded at the shop, Charles had said. But Ernest was obsessive about maintenance. He knew that place like the back of his hand, and how had my sons arrived at the hospital so fast? No one had called them. The hospital called me first. So how did they know before I did? And the insurance, they'd spoken about it from day one, as if they had been waiting for this to happen. I opened Ernest's old wooden desk. Inside the metal box, all his documents were neatly stacked: insurance papers, house deeds, business forms. Then I saw it. The life insurance policy Charles had mentioned. When? Except, it hadn't always been that amount. 6 months ago, the coverage was just $5,000. It had been updated by whom? And why hadn't Ernest said a word to me about it? I kept digging. Then, I found something worse. A workers' comp policy taken out just 2 months before his death. $5,000. In case of accidental death, $15,000 total between the two policies. Enough to tempt someone without a conscience. My phone buzzed again. Same number. Check the bank account. See who's been moving money? My blood ran cold. This person, whoever they were, knew everything. The insurance, the sons, the timing. This wasn't a prank. This was someone close. The next morning, I went to the bank. The same small-town branch where Ernest and I had our account for 30 years, Mrs. Thompson. The manager looked up from her desk. Her face softened when she saw me. Margot, I'm so sorry about Ernest. He was a good man. I managed a nod. Thank you, Mrs. Thompson. I need to review our accounts. She led me to her office, pulled up the statements. When I saw them, my stomach twisted. Large withdrawals. $1,000 in January, $3,000 in February, $4,000 in March. Money I hadn't touched. Who authorized these? I asked, my voice trembling. Mrs. Thompson adjusted her glasses. Your husband came in himself, she said softly. He said it was for repairs at the shop. I stared at the paper. My heart pounded in my throat. If Ernest had really been dead, then who had withdrawn that money? And if he wasn't dead, then what on earth had we buried? Ernest had never mentioned repairs at the shop, certainly not ones worth thousands of dollars. We'd discussed every expense in our life, down to the smallest grocery bill. This didn't make sense. Do you have the withdrawal slips? I asked. Mrs. Thompson opened a folder and slid a few faded receipts across the desk, and there it was Ernest's signature, or at least, something that looked like it, but it wasn't right. The handwriting was too shaky, too uncertain. Ernest's hand was always steady, confident, bold, unmistakable. Did he come alone to withdraw this money? I asked. My pulse pounding. Mrs. Thompson hesitated, tapping her pen against the desk. Now that you mention it, no. I think one of your sons was with him once or twice. Charles, I believe. He said your husband had trouble reading the fine print without his glasses. Charles. Of course, Ernest never needed help with documents. He wore his glasses all day. He never took them off. By the time I got home, I was trembling. I laid the receipts out on the kitchen table, each one like a piece of evidence in a crime I couldn't yet name. That's when my phone buzzed again. The insurance was their idea. They convinced Ernest to raise it for you. It was a trap. I stared at the screen, my throat dry. No, it couldn't be. But the evidence was starting to scream louder than my denial. The increased insurance, the quiet bank withdrawals, Charles showing up to help, the way he had organized the funeral like it was a business meeting. Had they really planned his death? The thought was too monstrous to accept, but the puzzle pieces kept fitting. The following days blurred into one long nightmare. Every smile from Charles, every hug from Henry, every kind word, they all felt staged, practiced, hollow. And still the messages kept coming. Go to the shop. Look in his desk. There are things you didn't see. I didn't want to go, but I had to. The shop stood just as Ernest had left it, except it was too clean, not the kind of clean you see after an accident. The kind of clean that hides something. The air smelled faintly of polish and disinfectant, not smoke or metal. No burn marks. No scorch trails. No twisted metal, no broken glass. Every machine, the welder, the compressor, the electric saw, all perfectly intact. Where's the machine that exploded? I whispered to the empty room. There was no answer. Only the faint hum of the refrigerator in the corner. Whatever had happened here, it wasn't an explosion then. I saw Ernest's desk. Inside. Between invoices and receipts was a folded note. His handwriting? Dated just 3 days before his death. Charles insists I need more insurance. He says it's for Margot, but something feels wrong. I don't trust his intentions. My hands shook as I turned the page. Henry brought me papers to sign. He says they're to modernize the shop, but I don't understand them. Why? All the hurry? A chill ran down my spine. He'd known. He'd sensed the darkness closing in. He'd been afraid. I kept searching until I found it. An envelope. My name on the front? Sealed. Inside was a letter, written in Ernest's unmistakable hand. My dearest Margot, if you are reading this, it means something has happened to me. I've noticed changes in Charles and Henry. They talk too much about money, about the insurance, about selling the house. Jasmine has been pushing them. She's the one who fuels their greed. Yesterday, Charles told me I should be more careful with my safety. That at my age, any accident could be fatal. Those words didn't sound like concern. They sounded like a warning. I love you, Margot. If anything happens to me, don't trust anyone blindly, not even our sons. The letter slipped from my hands and fluttered to the floor. Tears blurred my vision. Ernest had known. He had tried to warn me, and I, blind with love and faith, had ignored the signs that night. I sat alone in the dark until I heard the sound of tires on gravel. Charles's car. He walked in with a bottle of wine and a warm, practiced smile. You shouldn't be alone, Mom, he said softly. But now, that smile didn't look like comfort. It looked like control. Mom, I've been thinking about your future, Charles said, pouring himself a glass of wine without even asking if I wanted one. He swirled the liquid lazily, like a man too comfortable in someone else's home. The insurance money, he added casually, it's already being processed. You'll be getting 15,000. I froze. How do you know the exact amount? I asked, forcing a faint smile. Well, he said, leaning back, I helped Dad with the paperwork. He wanted to make sure you'd have enough to live comfortably. A lie? A calm, practiced lie. I remembered Ernest's words from his letter, how he'd been pressured into signing those papers. Charles wasn't helping his father. He was setting him up. And what do you think I should do with that money? I asked softly, watching his reaction. His eyes gleamed a flicker of greed, poorly disguised as concern. You could buy a smaller, cozier place, he said smoothly, or maybe move into a retirement community. You'd have company, medical care, security. Henry and I could help manage your money, make it last longer. Manage my money. We just want to take care of you, Mom, he continued. At your age, it's easy to get scammed. We know about investments. We could triple that amount in a few years. Triple it. Or make it disappear. Let me think about it, I said carefully, trying to buy time. Of course. Jasmine chimed in, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. But not too long, Margot. It's for your own good. Their smiles lingered in the doorway even after they left, and when the silence returned, I broke. I sat at the kitchen table, shaking with rage and disbelief. My sons, my flesh and blood, they hadn't just murdered their father, they were circling me now, like vultures around what was left. That night, the phone buzzed again. Another message. Longer, this time tomorrow, go to the police station. Ask for the report on Ernest's accident. There are contradictions you need to know. Contradictions. My heart pounded, but I went. The next morning, the police station smelled of coffee and dust. Sergeant O'Connell looked up from his desk, surprise, softening his weathered face. Mrs. Hayes, he greeted kindly. What can I do for you? I came for the report on my husband's accident, I said. From his shop. The explosion, he frowned, flipping through a stack of files. Explosion. At Ernest's shop? He scanned again, then slowly shook his head. We don't have any report of an explosion there. In fact, there's no record of any work accident involving your husband. The room tilted beneath me, but my son said the words, tangled in my throat. Mrs. Hayes, O'Connell interrupted gently, your husband arrived at Memorial Hospital on Tuesday morning, but not from a work accident. He paused, his tone tightening. According to the medical report, he was admitted unconscious. With symptoms of poisoning, my breath caught. The doctors found traces of methanol in his blood enough to cause blindness, brain damage, even death. It wasn't an explosion. Poison. It was poison. The sergeant continued. The hospital should have informed you, but the immediate family requested confidentiality to avoid speculation. They said you were too emotionally fragile to handle the details. The immediate family? Charles and Henry, they'd lied to everyone. They'd fabricated the explosion, and they'd buried the truth along with their father, Mrs. Hayes. The sergeant said carefully, if you suspect foul play, we can open an official investigation. Suspect? No. I was certain my husband had been murdered, and my sons had done it. That afternoon, Henry arrived with a bouquet of lilies and a smile so fake it made my skin crawl. How are you, Mom? You look tired. I'm fine, I lied, studying his every move. His hands, his eyes, his tone. Good, he said cheerfully. Charles and I were talking, we think you should sell the house soon. It's still in good condition. You could get a fair price. Why the rush? Well, you know, old houses lose value fast. And you'll need liquidity. Funeral expenses, medical bills, more lies. The funeral had been cheap, almost disrespectful, and the hospital bills were fully covered by insurance. So what liquidity did they need? As he talked, I looked at Henry and realized something terrifying. His calm was rehearsed. His tone, his timing, all too measured. They weren't grieving. They were finishing a job, and I was their next target. Henry's lie cracked under the weight of my stare. His lips trembled, eyes darting between me and the door like a cornered animal. You knew, I said flatly. You knew your father didn't die from an accident. His mask slipped for a fraction of a second. Panic, raw and unguarded before he composed himself again. Mom, what are you talking about? I went to the police, I said, voice steady. There's no record of an explosion. No accident, nothing. His pupils shrank. Mom, you shouldn't be doing things like that. You're confused. The grief? The grief? I cut in, or your lies. He stood too fast, knocking over his coffee. The dark liquid spread across the table like blood. I think you need to rest, he muttered, already walking away. On the porch, he pulled out his phone. I couldn't hear the words, but the tone low, frantic told me everything. That night, another message arrived. They're coming tomorrow. They'll say you're losing your mind. Don't believe them. And don't eat or drink anything they bring. Morning came heavy, air thick with dread. The doorbell rang. Charles and Henry stood there together, Jasmine between them, her smile practiced and poisonous. They carried a paper bag from the bakery downtown. Mom, we're worried about you, Charles began in a syrupy tone. The neighbors say you've been acting strange, talking to yourself, not eating. Another lie? Doris had said no such thing. Jasmine brought your favorite pastries, Henry added, and we made you coffee the special brand you love. I remembered the message. Don't take anything. Thank you, I said evenly, but I already had breakfast. Oh, Mom, Jasmine cooed. You've lost so much weight since Dad passed. I'm fine, I said. Charles sat closer, fake concern etched into his voice. We need to talk, Mom. Henry and I have spoken to some doctors about your recent behavior. My behavior. Yes, Henry said quickly. The questions, the police visit, the obsession with Dad's death, it's not healthy. Dr. Albright says this kind of paranoia is common for widows your age. Paranoia. The word hit like venom. They weren't trying to gaslight me. They were building a case to declare me insane. I'm not paranoid, I said coldly. I'm asking questions that should have been asked long ago. Charles smirked faintly. What questions? Why there's no police report for your father's accident? Why the shop was spotless if there was an explosion? Why you withdrew $5,000 from our account without telling me? Silence. A still, suffocating silence. Their faces betrayed them fear, calculation, panic. Mom, Henry said softly, Dad withdrew that money himself. For repairs, he wanted to surprise you. What surprise? He was going to remodel the house. Charles lied smoothly. Fix the roof, repaint the walls, a birthday surprise. If that's true, I said, voice sharp as glass, where are the workers? The materials? Why does no one in town know about this? Charles's jaw tightened. Not every work accident gets reported, he snapped. It was private property. Sergeant O'Connell disagrees, I said. He told me every serious injury must be reported. Jasmine stepped in, tone dripping with sugar. Margot, please. We're just trying to take care of you. I smiled, small, cold, deliberate. I know, I said. That's what scares me most. That's why we think it's best if you move somewhere with specialized care. A home, he paused, then corrected himself. A specialized care facility for people dealing with complicated grief. You'll have doctors, nurses, activities. You'll be safe, Henry added smoothly. And while you're settling in, we can handle the practical side, selling the house, managing the insurance, sorting through the paperwork. You shouldn't have to stress over that in your condition. There it was, the full picture. Stage 1, kill Ernest for the insurance. Stage 2, declare me insane, lock me away, take the rest. And what if I refuse? I asked quietly. Charles's smile didn't reach his eyes. Why would you refuse? We only want what's best for you. This is my house, I said, where I built my life with Ernest, where I raised both of you. Mom, Henry sighed, his tone slipping into irritation. You can't live in the past. Dad's gone. You have to move on. I have, I said coldly. But that doesn't mean I'm handing you my life or my money. Their expressions hardened. Concern gave way to threat. Charles stood abruptly. Fine. If you won't listen, we'll take more drastic measures. My stomach turned. What does that mean? It means we'll start the legal process to have you declared mentally incompetent, he said evenly. We have witnesses to your erratic behavior and a doctor's testimony confirming paranoia. Doctor, I demanded. What doctor? Dr. Albright, Henry said. He already signed a preliminary report. Based on our descriptions, he believes you need specialized care. A doctor I'd never met had declared me unstable, based entirely on their lies. I wondered how much that forged report had cost. Charles leaned forward. You can cooperate voluntarily or we can do it through the court. Either way, Mom, you're getting the help you need. A direct threat. If I didn't hand over control, they'd destroy me legally. I need time to think, I said, keeping my voice calm. Of course, Jasmine said sweetly, but not too much time. It's for your own good. When they finally left, silence filled the kitchen. My hands were trembling. My own sons, my flesh and blood, had not only murdered their father, but now planned to erase me too. Then, as night fell, my phone vibrated. The message was longer this time, Margot. This is Stephen Callahan, private investigator. Ernest hired me 3 weeks before he died. He suspected Charles and Henry. They poisoned him with methanol in his breakfast coffee. I have recordings, their voices, their plans. Meet me tomorrow, 3 p.m., at the corner cafe. Back table? Come alone at last. The voice behind the messages had a name. Proof existed. Real proof. For the first time since Ernest's death, I felt something close to relief and power. They thought they'd won. They thought I was weak. They were wrong. Tomorrow, everything would change. I went to bed with my heart pounding, not from fear but from resolve. Ernest's death would not be in vain. His instinct to hire that investigator would save me. Charles and Henry were about to learn a truth they'd never understood. A mother protecting the memory of her murdered husband is not fragile. She's unstoppable. If I was going to meet the man who held the truth about my husband's death, I needed to be ready for everything. At 2:30 p.m., I left my house with a mix of fear and resolve twisting in my stomach. The afternoon sun was fading behind gray clouds, and every passing face felt like it was watching me. Every shadow looked like a trap. The paranoia Charles and Henry had accused me of was suddenly starting to make sense. When I reached the corner cafe, it was half full. People chatting, cups clinking, the smell of roasted coffee in the air. It all felt too ordinary for what was about to happen. I walked straight to the back table, the one near the frosted window, and sat down. My hands trembled as I ordered a chamomile tea. At exactly 3 o'clock. A tall man with silver hair and calm, intelligent eyes walked in. He scanned the room once before heading directly to me. "Mrs. Hayes?" he asked softly. I nodded. My throat felt tight. "I'm Stephen Callahan. I'm so sorry for your loss." Ernest was a good man. He sat across from me and placed a brown folder on the table. The faint smell of paper and dust hung between us. "Before I show you what I have," he said gently, "you need to understand what you're about to see and hear will be painful. Are you sure you're ready?" "I've been ready," I replied, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "Since the moment I got your first message." Stephen nodded slowly and took out a small voice recorder. "Ernest came to see me about a month ago. He was worried about his sons. He hired me to investigate discreetly." He pressed play. Ernest's voice filled the tiny space between us. Familiar, loving, haunted. "Stephen, if something happens to me, it won't be an accident. Charles and Henry keep pressuring me to increase my life insurance. Yesterday, Charles brought papers he said were to protect Margot, but I found clauses that benefit him and Henry directly." My breath caught. Hearing him again, his voice, his concern was like a blade through my chest. Stephen let the recording continue. "Henry keeps asking about my schedule, what I eat for breakfast. When I leave for the shop, if Margot's with me, he says it's out of concern, but it feels wrong. Like he's planning something." Stephen paused the playback. "That was recorded 3 weeks before his death," he said. "But there's more." He pressed play again. This time, another voice filled the cafe cold. "Calculated, Charles. No, we can't wait any longer." The old man's starting to suspect something. He asked about the insurance yesterday. "Yes, I already have the methanol. It's perfect. Looks like a heart attack or stroke." "No, Mom won't be a problem. Once Dad's gone, she'll be too devastated to do anything." Tears spilled down my cheeks. My own son's voice planning his father's murder like a business transaction? Stephen looked at me with quiet sympathy. "There's more," he said gently. "This one is from the day before Ernest died." He hit play again. Henry's voice now lighter but just as sinister. "Everything's ready. Tomorrow, Charles will mix it into Dad's coffee. We told him it's a vitamin supplement from the doctor. He'll drink it. First dizziness, then confusion, blindness, convulsions. By the time the doctors realize it's poisoning, it'll be too late." The room spun. My teacup rattled in its saucer. My babies, the boys I'd held when they were sick, the sons I'd sacrificed everything for, had murdered their father with cold precision. "How? How did you get this?" I whispered, voice shaking. "Ernest asked me to install small listening devices in your home," Stephen said quietly. He didn't know what was coming, but he knew something wasn't right. He pulled photos from the folder and slid them across the table. "This," he said, tapping the top photo, "is Charles buying methanol from a hardware store 30 miles out of town. He paid cash under a fake name, but I caught it on video." In the grainy image, Charles stood by a counter, his face half turned, unmistakable. The evidence was undeniable. My sons had murdered their father. And now, they were coming for me. The photographs didn't lie. There was Charles, my son, stepping out of a hardware store, a small brown bottle clutched in his hand. The date printed on the corner was 5 days before Ernest's death. Stephen's voice was calm, professional, but every word hit like a knife. "And this," he said, sliding another set of papers across the table. "These are Charles and Henry's financial records from the past 6 months." I scanned the pages. The numbers told their own story, a spiral of reckless spending and mounting debt. Charles owed $70,000 to a city lender. Henry was drowning in gambling debts of $40,000. Desperation. That was the word that echoed in my mind. It wasn't just greed that had driven them. It was collapse, financial, moral, human. They'd seen their father as an answer, a wallet, a way out. "Why didn't you go to the police right after Ernest's death?" I asked. Stephen's jaw tightened. "Because they were careful. Too careful. They bribed the attending doctor to falsify the cause of death. The certificate says heart failure from a work injury, not poisoning. Without medical proof, the recordings alone wouldn't hold up in court." My breath trembled. "But now we have everything, don't we?" He nodded slowly. "We do. But there's something else, and it's worse. A chill crept up my spine. What do you mean? Stephen hesitated, then pressed play on another recording. Charles's voice filled the air, cold and detached. Once we get Dad's insurance money, we have to deal with Mom too. Can't risk her getting suspicious. Henry's voice followed, quieter, hesitant. How? Same way as Dad, Charles replied. But this time we'll make it look like suicide. A widow who can't live without her husband? Nobody will question it. And since we're her only heirs, everything becomes ours. The house, the savings, the $200,000 insurance payout. The recording stopped. For a moment I couldn't breathe. My own sons planning my death, speaking about me, as if I were a problem to be erased. The boys I'd fed, comforted, defended, now plotting to bury me for money. My hands shook violently. I could barely speak. Stephen's tone softened. Mrs. Hayes, I know this is unbearable, but we have enough to bring them down. I wiped my tears, forcing the words out. What do we do now? First we go to the police. Sergeant O'Connell, he's one of the few honest ones left. He'll take this seriously, but we need to move fast. Your sons are trying to have you declared mentally incompetent. If they succeed, your testimony will be worthless. My eyes widened. When tomorrow, 10 a.m., they're meeting with Judge Miller to start the process. I intercepted the call this morning. I pushed back my chair and stood. Then we act tonight. Exactly, Stephen said. But before we go, there's one more thing you should see. He pulled a final photograph from his folder and laid it gently on the table. It showed Ernest leaving a medical clinic I didn't recognize. This was 3 days before he died, Stephen explained. He had a full medical exam done in the city. The results show he was perfectly healthy, no heart problems, no high blood pressure, nothing. He was in excellent condition. He handed me the report. The words swam through my tears. Normal, healthy, stable. There it was, the final proof. Ernest hadn't died by chance. He'd been murdered. Murdered by the sons we raised. I looked at Stephen, gripping his hand. Thank you, I whispered, for keeping your promise to my husband now. Let's get justice. That night we drove straight to the police station. The city was quiet, wrapped in cold air and silence. Inside, the dim lights of the station cast long shadows over the tiled floor. Sergeant O'Connell was on duty, bent over paperwork. I approached his desk, my heart pounding. Sergeant, I said firmly, I need to file a complaint for the murder of my husband, Ernest Hayes. He looked up, startled. Murder. Mrs. Hayes. The report says heart complications from a work accident. The report is a lie, I said, placing Stephen's folder on his desk. My husband was poisoned with methanol by our own sons. For 2 straight hours. Stephen and I laid everything on the table, piece by piece. The recordings, the photographs of Charles walking out of the hardware store with that small bottle, the financial records showing the stolen money, Ernest's medical reports proving he'd been perfectly healthy. And finally, the audio, my son's own voices confessing to murder. And plotting mine. Sergeant O'Connell listened in complete silence. Each new piece of evidence deepened the lines on his face. When the last recording ended, he leaned back in his chair, stunned. This, he murmured, this is monstrous. Mrs. Hayes, are you absolutely sure you want to go through with this? Once we arrest your sons, there's no turning back. I met his eyes, my voice steady. Sergeant, those men murdered my husband in cold blood. They were planning to murder me next. They are no longer my sons. They're criminals, and they must pay for what they did. He nodded grimly. We'll need the medical examiner to exhume your husband's body to confirm methanol poisoning. Are you prepared for that? Do whatever's necessary, I said without hesitation. Within minutes, O'Connell was on the phone with the district attorney. Despite the late hour, the DA came to the station personally. He reviewed every photo, every document, every voice recording, and when he finished, he looked up with resolve. Authorize immediate arrest warrants for Charles and Henry Hayes, he ordered. We'll move at dawn. We can't risk them destroying evidence. Stephen offered to walk me home. At my door, he paused. Are you sure you'll be all right alone tonight? I nodded. After everything I've learned, I'm not afraid anymore. Justice is already on its way. That night, sleep never came. I sat in my kitchen surrounded by silence, staring at Ernest's photographs on the wall. For the first time since his death, the grief inside me didn't feel hollow. It felt purposeful, sharp, alive. Justice was finally within reach. At 6 in the morning, my phone rang. It was Charles. Mom, he said urgently, his voice trembling, you need to come to Henry's house right now. Something terrible's happened. What happened? I asked, feigning concern. It's better if I tell you in person. Please hurry. I froze. The same voice I'd heard plotting my death just hours earlier. It was a trap. They were moving sooner than planned. I'm on my way. I lied. I stayed exactly where I was. In my kitchen, waiting at 7:30, through the curtains I saw the flashing lights, police cars speeding down both streets, splitting directions toward my son's homes. My phone began to ring again and again. First Charles, then Henry, both voices laced with panic, desperation, fear. I didn't answer a single call. At 9 sharp, there was a knock at my door. Sergeant O'Connell stood there, solemn. "Mrs. Hayes, it's over. We've arrested Charles and Henry. They're in custody, charged with first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder." My knees weakened, but for the first time in months, the trembling wasn't from fear. It was relief. "How did they react?" I asked quietly. Charles tried to deny everything until we played the recordings. Then he broke down. Henry attempted to flee through the back window. We chased him for 6 blocks before bringing him in. By afternoon, Jasmine showed up. Her eyes were swollen. Her voice cracked from crying. A performance I wasn't buying for a second. "Mrs. Hayes," she sobbed, "please, you have to drop the charges against Charles. He's not evil, he was just desperate. It was my fault too. I pushed him about the debts. Please, he's still your son." I stared at her, unmoved. "Jasmine, your husband poisoned my husband. He planned to murder me next. There is no excuse and no forgiveness for that." She broke down completely. "But we're family. Think about what this will do to all of us." "The family," I said coldly, "died the day you decided to kill Ernest for money." I opened the door. "Now please, leave my house." The lab results came back, and just as Stephen had discovered, they confirmed the unthinkable lethal levels of methanol. Enough to cause every single symptom my husband had suffered before his death. The entire town went silent. No one could believe what the reports revealed. 2 sons, a father, and the most heartless crime our community had ever seen. Local newspapers called it the cruelest crime of the decade. And for once, they weren't exaggerating. As the investigation deepened, the ugly truth unfolded piece by piece. Charles had owed over $7,000 to loan sharks who had already started threatening him with violence. Henry had lost $5,000 in illegal gambling dens, and was being hunted by collectors too. They saw Ernest's life insurance as their salvation, but their greed made them stupid. They'd increased the policies so dramatically that Ernest himself had started to grow suspicious. Then came another revelation. The doctor who had falsified Ernest's death certificate, he had been paid $5,000 in cash by Charles. He too was arrested for falsifying official documents and obstructing justice. Cut to Stephen and Mrs. Hayes in the kitchen. Dim light. Stephen sat across from me, explaining everything Ernest had done. "Your husband," he said quietly, "was smarter than they realized. He felt something was wrong, but he couldn't prove it. So he hired me not just to investigate your sons, but to protect you if anything ever happened to him." I swallowed hard. He knew they might kill him. Stephen hesitated. "Not exactly, but he suspected danger. That's why he installed the recorders. That's why we documented everything. He wanted to make sure that if anything ever happened, the truth would come out. Even after his death, my husband was still protecting me. He had seen the storm coming, and somehow, even from the grave, he made sure justice would win." Cut to courthouse exterior. Morning. 2 months later, the trial date arrived. 2 months of sleepless nights, endless hearings, an unbearable anticipation, all leading to this moment. Charles and Henry were charged with first-degree murder, a crime that could put them behind bars for 25 years to life. The courtroom was packed. Reporters lined every wall. Neighbors, co-workers, people I barely knew, everyone came to witness what they called the case of the killer's sons. I wore my best black dress, the same one I'd worn at my wedding. Back then, it symbolized love. Now, it was a symbol of mourning and dignity. Stephen sat beside me through the entire hearing. His steady presence was the only thing keeping me from falling apart. Sound, handcuffs clicking, then they brought them in. Charles and Henry, dressed in orange prison jumpsuits, hands cuffed, faces pale. For a brief moment, my heart cracked open. Not for them, but for the innocent boys they used to be. But pity didn't belong here anymore. They had chosen this path long before they killed their father. Cut to courtroom silence. The prosecutor began presenting the case. Each piece of evidence hit like a hammer. The recordings, the bank documents, the forensic reports. When the audio of my son's voices filled the courtroom, their cold, emotionless tone as they planned Ernest's murder, a silence fell so deep you could hear the buzz of the lights above us. Then came the tape where they plotted my death. Gasps echoed around the room. An elderly woman stood up and left crying. I couldn't blame her. It was too much to bear, even for strangers. Prosecutor, firm voice, "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he said, "this isn't just greed. It's not desperation. This is premeditation. 2 men decided to murder the father who raised them for money, for selfish debts, for nothing that could ever justify such cruelty. Their lawyers tried to twist the story, desperation, bad influence, pressure, but the evidence? It didn't lie. The voices didn't lie. The money trail didn't lie. And Ernest's body, his blood, didn't lie. When it was my turn to testify, I stood. My legs trembled, but my heart didn't. For the first time in months, I wasn't afraid. I looked straight ahead, at the faces of my sons, and I told the truth, every painful, necessary word of it. The prosecutor stepped forward. "Mrs. Hayes," he began softly, "can you tell us what your relationship was like with your sons before your husband's murder?" I looked at Charles and Henry. Their faces, familiar yet now so foreign, made my throat tighten. "I thought I had a good relationship with them," I said. "I raised them with love. I sacrificed everything for their well-being. Their father worked from sunrise to sunset to give them a good life. I never imagined that love and sacrifice would one day become the reason for his murder." He paused for a moment, then asked, "At any point, did you ever suspect they could harm your husband?" "No," I whispered. "That's the most painful part of all this. I trusted them completely. When they told me Ernest had an accident at his shop, I believed them. When they rushed the funeral arrangements, I thought they were being efficient in their grief. I never imagined they were covering up a murder." Charles lowered his head. Henry looked at me defiantly, but behind that defiance, I saw it. Tears. Too late for tears. Too late for regret. Cut to, prosecutor pressing play. Courtroom silent. Then came the moment that changed everything. The prosecutor decided to play the full recording, the one where they planned my murder. Charles's voice filled the courtroom. "Once we have Dad's insurance money, we need to get rid of Mom too. We can't risk her getting suspicious." A wave of horror swept through the room. People gasped. Some turned toward me with eyes full of disbelief and pity. "How did you feel when you heard this recording for the first time?" the prosecutor asked gently. I took a deep breath. I realized. I said that I had lost my 2 sons long before I lost my husband. The babies I nursed, the children I held when they cried, they were gone. Replaced by 2 strangers capable of anything, even murder. For money. Cut to. Defense table tense. Silence. The defense tried to twist the story. They said maybe I had misinterpreted my son's words, that grief had clouded my judgment. But the recordings spoke for themselves. No one could deny the truth when it played out loud for the world to hear. Cut to. Stephen testifying. Stephen took the stand next. He explained every step of Ernest's secret investigation, how Ernest had hired him out of fear, how they documented everything, how they'd gathered proof even before Ernest's death. Then the medical examiner testified. His voice was cold, factual. He explained the autopsy results, lethal levels of methanol, the kind of poison that kills slowly and mimics illness. Exactly what Ernest had suffered. 3 days of devastating testimony followed. Each witness brought another blow. Each truth, another wound reopened. Then came the closing arguments. The prosecutor stood before the jury, his voice sharp as steel. "Charles and Henry Hayes are not victims of circumstance," he said. "They are predators, men who saw their own parents as financial obstacles. They planned, executed, and covered up their father's murder. And they were planning to do the same to their mother. They don't deserve compassion. They deserve justice." Cut to courtroom low-tension music, building. The jury left to deliberate. 6 hours. 6 hours of silence, of pacing, of waiting. When they finally returned, you could feel every heartbeat in that room. I could hear my own. The judge read the verdict. In the case of the state versus Charles Hayes and Henry Hayes, on the charge of first-degree murder of Ernest Hayes, we find the defendants guilty. The room erupted. Gasps, murmurs, disbelief. Charles collapsed in his chair, sobbing, realizing what he'd done. Henry sat frozen, expressionless. Then came the second charge. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder against Margot Hayes, we find the defendants guilty. The judge's voice was steady, almost emotionless. "Charles Hayes and Henry Hayes, for the premeditated murder of your father and conspiracy to murder your mother, I sentence you to life in prison, without the possibility of parole for 30 years. The sound of the gavel echoed like thunder, and in that instant, a weight I'd carried for months finally lifted. Justice. Ernest finally had justice. After the trial, people came to hug me, neighbors, strangers, even reporters who had tears in their eyes. Doris found me in the hallway and hugged me tightly. "Margot," she whispered, "Ernest can rest in peace now." That night, I went back home. The house was the same, but it felt different. It wasn't a place of pain and betrayal anymore. For the first time in months, it felt like peace. It was my home again. The place where Ernest and I had shared 42 beautiful years of love, laughter, and struggle. A week after the trial, Stephen came to visit me. He sat across the table, a gentle smile on his face. "How do you feel?" he asked. "At peace," I said honestly. "For the first time since Ernest's death, I sleep soundly. I know he's resting too, because his death did not go unpunished. Stephen nodded quietly. Then he asked, "And what about the insurance money? The savings?" I smiled faintly. "I donated all of Ernest's life insurance money to a foundation for victims of family crimes. That money was stained with blood. I could never use it. My personal savings are enough to live simply, and that's all I need." Soft piano music fades, and 6 months after the trial, a letter arrived at my door, prison mail. It was from Charles. Mom, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need you to know that I regret everything. The money, the debts, the desperation, they blinded us. Henry and I destroyed the most loving family in the world for $5,000 we never even got to enjoy. Tomorrow, I will take my own life. I can't live with what we did. Tell Dad we're sorry. Sorry we were such terrible sons. I didn't make it in time to stop him. The next day, they found Charles hanging in his cell. When Henry learned of his brother's death, he suffered a complete breakdown and was transferred to the prison's psychiatric ward. Cut 2. Quiet. Warm daylight garden sounds. 2 years have passed since the trial. Now, I live quietly in my small house. I turned Ernest's old workshop into a garden. A garden full of red roses, white carnations, and sunflowers that reach for the light. Just as he always taught me to do during hard times every Sunday. I pick a few flowers and take them to his grave. Stephen still visits me often now, not as an investigator, but as a dear friend who checks in to make sure I'm okay. Sometimes the neighbors ask me if I miss my sons. The answer is complicated. I miss the little boys they once were. The children who ran through this garden laughing. But those children died long before Ernest did. The men they became. They were strangers who shared my blood, but not my heart. I've learned that true family isn't defined by blood, it's defined by love, loyalty, and respect. Ernest was my family for 42 years. The friends who stood by me through the darkest nights, they are my family now. Justice didn't bring Ernest back, but it gave me peace. And sometimes when I sit on the porch at dusk, the same porch where we used to drink coffee together, I swear I can feel him there beside me. Proud that I was strong enough to do the right thing. Even when it meant losing my sons forever. Scene fade, passing of time, wind rustling, distant church bell. 5 years have passed since that terrible day at the cemetery, the day everything changed. I'm 71 now. My hair is completely white, a map of every storm I've survived. But my eyes, Doris says, shine with a peace they never had before. The house Ernest and I built is still my sanctuary. I've repainted the walls a soft yellow, his favorite color. The garden outside, once his shop, has become the most beautiful in the neighborhood. Sunflowers turn toward the light. Roses bloom in perfect rows, reminders that even after tragedy, life can still grow. Stephen Callahan, the man who helped me seek justice, is now part of my chosen family. He visits every Wednesday afternoon. We sit on the porch with coffee, just like Ernest and I used to, while Stephen tells me stories about his new cases. Sometimes he asks me, "Do you ever regret it, Margot, turning in your own sons?" I always give him the same answer: never. The truth hurts, but lies kill the soul. Music softens hopeful piano notes. The foundation I started with Ernest's insurance money, the Ernest Hayes Foundation for Victims of Family Crimes, has grown far beyond what I imagined. We now help dozens of families every year. Mothers, fathers, children, people who've been betrayed by the ones they trusted most. We offer therapy, legal help, and private investigators, so that no one else has to suffer in silence, like I once did. 6 months ago, a woman named Eleanor came to see me. She was 40, trembling and broken. She believed her brother had murdered their mother for an inheritance. Her story was painfully familiar. The same greed, the same lies, the same despair. And as I listened to her, I realized something. Maybe Ernest's death, as cruel as it was, gave birth to something good, something that could save others. Final slow zoom out porch, sunset light now. When I sit outside and the evening breeze carries the scent of roses through the garden, I whisper to Ernest, "Your story didn't end with tragedy, my love. It became a light for others lost in darkness. And somewhere I know," he smiles. The foundation took Eleanor's case, gave her a private investigator, legal counsel, and therapy without charging a cent. 3 months later, her brother was convicted of murdering their mother. When the verdict came, she ran into my arms, crying, "Mrs. Hayes, you saved my life. If you hadn't had the courage to report your sons, I never would have reported mine." Moments like that remind me that every wound, every sleepless night, every tear, it all had meaning. Henry is still alive, but he's no longer the man I once knew. After Charles's suicide, his mind shattered. The doctors say he lives trapped in guilt and paranoia, convinced that Ernest visits him each night to condemn him for the murder. He's attempted suicide 3 times. The guards watch him constantly now. Sometimes letters come from him rambling, desperate things, begging for forgiveness. For a while, I read them, searching for a trace of the son I once loved, but but all I found was pain. Now they sit unopened in a shoebox. Some doors don't need reopening. Peace is a fragile thing. I choose to protect mine. Jasmine vanished right after the trial. People say she moved to the city, changed her name. I don't blame her. Living with the shadow of a murderer's name isn't easy. Sometimes I wonder if she knew what Charles planned. Whether silence made her guilty too. But those thoughts belong to the past. I've learned to live only in the present. Spring Creek never forgot the case. It became a legend. A cautionary tale parents whispered to their children about greed and betrayal. Some people call me brave. Others call me cruel. I don't care. Truth doesn't need permission to exist. My health has held steady. The doctor says it's because I finally let go of the weight I carried for years. The body heals when the heart finds peace, he told me. He was right. Sunday mornings are sacred. I walked to Ernest's grave with fresh flowers from the garden. His headstone bears the words I chose after the trial. Ernest Hayes, beloved husband, betrayed father, honorable man. His love was stronger than his death. I tell him everything about the foundation, about the families we've helped, about the letters of gratitude that fill my mailbox. When the wind moves through the trees, I feel him there, listening. Do you know what's strange, my love? I said last Sunday, I don't feel pain when I think of Charles and Henry anymore. Only pity. They had all the love in the world and traded it for greed. They could have been like you, good, honest, loyal, but they chose to destroy everything. Last week, a reporter came from the city to film a documentary on family crimes. She asked what message I wanted to leave for others. Family is not an excuse for crime, I told her. Love isn't blind, it has limits. Real love doesn't harm, and it's never too late to tell the truth, no matter who it exposes. This year marked 5 years since Ernest's death. I held a memorial in his honor. Over 200 people came, neighbors, foundation members, families we'd helped, local officials. It wasn't sorrowful, it was powerful. Ernest's death had begun in tragedy, but ended in purpose. Stephen stood at the podium and said, Ernest Hayes died because of his son's greed, but his legacy lives in every family that finds justice through his wife's courage. In that moment, surrounded by light and flowers, I realized something. Ernest's story was no longer about betrayal or death. It was about strength, and the woman who refused to let evil have the final word. Evil tried to destroy Ernest's story, but somehow, good turned it into hope for others. At night, before I go to sleep, I sometimes open the old photo album. There they are, Charles and Henry, still children, running through the yard, their father lifting them high into the air, all of us laughing around the Christmas tree. I let myself cry, not for the men they became, but for the innocent boys they once were, because those children didn't deserve the fate that greed carved for them, but the men they became. They chose their own path, and I've finally made peace with that. My story. It ended up being more than just a personal tragedy. It became proof that justice is possible even when it comes from the most unexpected place. That a 66-year-old widow can stand against betrayal and win. That truth will always outshine lies. That love, the real kind, is stronger than death. And that it's never too late to do what's right. Tomorrow is Wednesday. Stephen will come for coffee, as he always does. I'll bake his favorite pastry. Tell him about the new thank you letters we received this week. After that, we'll work together in the garden, planting new flowers for spring. Life goes on, simpler now, but more real than it ever was before. I've learned that family isn't about blood. It's about shared values, respect, and love that never turns into harm. Ernest, wherever you are, I hope you know I kept my promise. The one I made by your grave, that terrible day. I found the truth. I sought justice. And I turned our pain into hope for others. Your death wasn't in vain. My love. Soft background music fades in, emotional piano, gentle strings. Did you like my story? And from which city are you listening today? Let's meet in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, you can support me by sending a super thanks. It really helps me keep bringing more true life stories your way. Thank you, truly, for all your love and support. I can't wait to read your thoughts about this story, and before you go on the screen, you'll see 2 more powerful life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more waiting on this channel. Don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you in the next life story.